Have you ever heard of the Firearms Industry Fairness Act? Me either until recently. This is Alan with Quarter Horse Arms, and as I was perusing some interesting topics, I wound up coming across a bill called H.R. 8741, which is the Firearms Industry Fairness Act. Not sure there's a whole lot of fairness with it. However, it was introduced at the end of August 2022 by Carolyn Maloney, who was a Democrat representative from New York. I believe this was kind of a last gasp for her because she was voted out of office or chose not to run or something. Really doesn't matter. But as I read some of the components of the bill, it was a combination of entertaining and irritating. So I thought I'd share some of these thoughts with you. It starts out with stating that AR-15s are abnormally dangerous and meant for battlefields, but they get used in mass shootings. So if the AR-15 is abnormally dangerous, should I be okay with my normally dangerous 45? Good question, because that one also gets addressed. So the other premise with the bill was record-breaking profits from sales. And I'm talking about the manufacturers in this case. And you kind of got to wonder why. Well, there's a pretty good answer. For starters, the AR-15 platform and other ones similar to it are actually great weapons. You know, if you're looking at firing 5.56 or 2.23, it's a very easy weapon to control. Relatively speaking, the ammunition is inexpensive, and I did say relatively speaking. And it's very adaptable. You can do all kinds of things to it. And, you know, from a price perspective, it's reasonably affordable. You can get entry-level, mid-range, high-end, just like you can any other weapon. And the other premise stated in this bill to continue was large capacity magazines lead to more shootings. I'm not so sure about that one. It says, and this is pretty close to a quote, but we'll call it a paraphrase. By having a large capacity magazine, it reduces the chance of bystanders and law enforcement officers to intervene. Okay, I'm not sure what the point is. I mean, most people, if somebody's shooting and you don't have a gun or aren't in cover, I'm going to assume that most people are pretty bright and they're going to look for cover. And also being reasonable and rational, well, you know, most of the time, I'd like to think the law enforcement officers also had the common sense to get out of the line of fire so they can protect themselves and then, you know, deal with the shooter. And it also continued down, and, you know, some of this is, it's actually mostly a lot of bullshit. Says the industry has failed to monitor distribution, so a large number of guns used in violent shootings are coming from a small number of dealers. Well, you're not getting them from me, so I'm not sure who's getting them. But, you know, frankly, I'd like to increase my sales. And then it says that, and it's also deceptive, 5 manufacturers made more than $1 billion in sales of AR-15s over the past decade. I wasn't able to find any information about that. So they're talking $100 million a year in a massive industry. So maybe not. Okay. So what is this bill actually saying? Well, if you import or manufacture more than 100 of these assault weapons that are abnormally dangerous, you have to pay a 20% tax on the gross sales receipt. So what she's saying essentially, because you know the manufacturers would pass that off right to the consumer, for any host of weapons that she's going to, that there's going to be a surcharge for. And the definitions are actually pretty broad. The only thing that was excluded by her in the bill was, if you're making it for the government, that's okay. Not a big deal. And as I went through the list, there were about 140 weapons or categories of weapons that were named in this bill that were deemed to be abnormally dangerous. And I'm also going to go out on a limb and speculate that maybe she doesn't know what AR actually stands for. It's not assault rifle, and unfortunately for the Armalite Corporation, AR was their designation for the AR series, so for Armalite. And as far as assault rifle, okay. I'm figuring if you're shooting at somebody, it doesn't matter what the weapon is. And yeah, I know I'm splitting hairs. And people have gotten so sensitized about ARs, including my mother, who thinks those ARs are nasty, horrible weapons. And, I kind of had to explain, Mom, I make those. And she's like, but they're dangerous. And I was like, well, not if they're not loaded and if the person using them knows what they're doing. But, regardless of that, the semi-auto weapons that they listed, if it's fed by a magazine, like a detachable magazine, and if it has any one of these following things, a pistol grip, a forestock grip, a grenade launcher, retrospectively, that's not a bad idea to put on a gun. I mean, if you can't get them with 30 rounds, shoot a grenade. Okay. If it has a folding or telescoping stock, if it has a barrel shroud or a threaded barrel or any device that will increase the number of rounds per minute that it can fire. So presumably, you may be looking at, bump stocks, forced reset triggers, stuff like that. At no point does it mention how fast you can manually squeeze the trigger. And they do specify in the bill that a barrel shroud, well, it's okay to have something on the bottom, but not the top. So I'm not sure what the rationale for that is, unless she expects shooters to burn their hands, therefore they won't hold the gun so they can't shoot people. I don't know. So I thought it was funny. Threaded barrel gets intriguing too. And I'll explain why in a second. So if you go down to semi-auto pistols, which presumably are magazine fed, the bill is saying no more than 15 rounds. So effectively like a Glock 19 magazine capacity. Yeah, you're in the ballpark for a lot of handguns anyway, or semi-auto handguns. You cannot have a second pistol grip. Well, that's already against federal law. You cannot have an alternative feed device. It cannot be a semi-auto version of an automatic weapon. So that kind of begs the question, would the Glock 17 be the semi-auto version of the Glock 18, which is select fire? Don't know. It didn't really say. It also can't have a buffer tube or brace horizontally back from the grip. So this is the way of kind of sneaking and getting rid of like the AR pistols. But at any rate, the threaded barrel issue and barrel shroud for a semi-auto pistol is weird. Because they're not going after silencers, but they're going after threaded barrels. Well, no big deal. I have yet to see a semi-auto pistol with a barrel shroud. I'm actually not exactly sure what one would look like. But be that as it may, the implications for firearms owners and some of the firearms manufacturers, could be significant. Ignoring the threaded barrel for the, attachment of a silencer, Springfield, with their Hellcat model, just came out with, or recently came out with, kind of an upscale version of the Hellcat that has, optics, but it has a timed compensator on it. So there's a compensator integral to the pistol. Yes, you can remove it, but that theoretically would ease, anything like muzzle rise and make it easier and more accurate to shoot. So what happens to those guns? But we're not done yet. I haven't even got there yet. Semi-automatic shotguns cannot have a detachable magazine that holds more than 5 rounds. Also, the bill says you can't put a grenade launcher on your shotgun. So, maybe the best thing to do would be to get a rifle with an integral pistol with a grenade launcher and a shotgun. I guess you could do it. All right. So aside from not having a grenade launcher, you cannot put, this is per the bill, by the way. And as far as I can tell, this is still in committee. You can't put a folding or telescoping stock on it. You can't use a pistol grip or bird's head grip. I'm not 100% sure who would actually have one of those. Pistol grips, on the other hand, are pretty common. If you're looking at Mossberg, Stevens shotguns, a lot of these manufacturers, one of their constant features are the pistol grips. And you cannot have a 4-stock grip on your shotgun. And the other one that was intriguing, which says you cannot have a shotgun with a revolving cylinder. The one that comes immediately to mind is the Taurus Judge. You've got 5 or 6 shots of a 410 shotgun shell or a 45 long Colt. So are they going to specifically exclude that handgun, which is a revolver, but I guess if you're loading it with shotgun shells, does that make it a shotgun? All right, so in terms of other stuff, when I mentioned the 140 kinds of weapons or weapon types, it's all the AKs, any SKS that's been fitted with a magazine, AR-10s, AR-15s, and a whole boatload of guns. Most of which I've heard of. A lot of them are like, you probably had to go into a catalog to come up with these things. But regardless, it was her last gasp in office. And she's not in office anymore. However, the bill still is. So one of the things that, you kind of have to look at is, what is the intent? I'd like to think that people were reasonable and intelligent. And the biggest thing that concerns me is you're going after gun manufacturers directly, gun owners or gun enthusiasts indirectly, but at no point does anyone ever address dealing with the people that are committing these crimes. And that in and of itself is something significant. If you're going to hold a gun owner hostage, basically by jacking up the price of their guns, and you're going to go after the manufacturers, the firearms manufacturers, for a 20% tax on anything they produce over 100 items. Okay. So let's take a look at what other silly laws we have, and they may not be so silly to you. So now we're talking about holding gun manufacturers responsible for how their products are used. It's an interesting precedent because, this past year there were, I think, 692 mass shootings. That doesn't mean deaths. Those are actually just shootings where 4 or more people